The following public affairs presentation is produced exclusively for the Cox Channel. And now, The Verdict.
Welcome to The Verdict. I'm Kent Meyers, and once again this week Mick Cornett is not here and will not be here for a few weeks as the campaign moves along for the 5th Congressional District seat, which Mick is seeking, among others. To my right, I'm pleased very much to have back a classmate of my daughter's at Heritage Hall, graduating pretty shortly, or just has graduated, as a matter of fact, Reid Calhoun. Reid, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we had a groundswell of support after last week's show to bring you back, and I'm really pleased you'd come back again. We're going to be talking today about the changing face of religion in America with Dr. Guy Ames, the senior pastor at Chapel Hill United Methodist Church. And Reid, speak from a young person's standpoint and tell us how you see religion in America changing for the young person, if at all.
Well, in today's youth, the perspectives are so different. I can only really speak for myself, but I think I see, unfortunately, it's kind of losing its place in youth today, and that's a generality. But I feel that unfortunately a lot of maybe it's in the home or somewhere in another youth's life, but it's kind of fading away in today's youth population.
Well, we'll talk to Guy Ames about that. He'll be back with us when we rejoin you after we take a short commercial break. Kent Meyers and Reid Calhoun will be visiting with Dr. Guy Ames, Methodist minister, about the changing face of religion in America. You're watching The Verdict.
At Chesapeake Energy, here's a few of our favorite Hornets. Alexis likes reading. Sam enjoys history. Alec loves math. Chesapeake is proud to support both the Oklahoma City NBA Hornets and the Young Hornets at Horace Mann Elementary, where over 150 Chesapeake employees mentor to children each week. The students gain a lot from the experience, but not as much as we do. Chesapeake Energy, committed to building a better Oklahoma.
Welcome to The Verdict. I'm Kent Meyers with my co-host Reid Calhoun again this week, and to my left is our special guest today, Dr. Guy Ames. Guy grew up in Muskogee. He was a Muskogee rougher, I take it. He graduated from Muskogee High School. He comes from a family of Methodist ministers. He obtained his Master of Divinity degree from Asbury Theological Seminary. He has recently completed 28 years in the ministry, including 12 years at Chapel Hill United Methodist Church. This is his first visit to The Verdict, but I hope not his last. Guy, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're really glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
Tell me about how coming from a family of Methodist pastors has affected your life.
Being a preacher's kid, or sometimes we call it a theological offspring, it's really been a part of our family tradition. A few years ago, I had a relative I didn't know I had come into my study and give me even some more information, and discovered that not only were both my grandfathers Methodist preachers, but my dad's grandfather and his great-grandfather were also Methodist preachers. We go back to about 1838, and I've got 3 sons, Reid, you know, and they call this the family curse, is what they call it. I would say a couple of things about, in answer to your question. One is that growing up in a Methodist parsonage to two Methodist preachers' kids was for me a pleasant place. And so it really brought me into opportunities of faith. My parents didn't hand me faith, but they sure made the opportunities for that. And but there were times when you felt like you were really kind of standing out there in the middle of everybody, and some expectations about things. You know, from time to time when I was a kid, someone would say, "No, you can't do that. You're a preacher's kid," which would just kind of fire me up.
And did you have any other thoughts, like how early did you decide that you wanted to proceed and be a Methodist?
Well, one thing I never wanted to be was a preacher.
Really?
I did not want to be a preacher. I thought that would be a terrible job to have, and I'd watched a lot of those things with my dad. And living in a fishbowl was not something I wanted to do. But one of the things I wanted real early was to serve people, and I really wanted to serve God. And truthfully, even up to the point of coming out of seminary, I thought I probably wouldn't make a very good pastor. I thought I ought to be associate, or maybe I ought to teach or counsel or do anything else. And I was getting married, and I tried every other avenue coming out of seminary. I got to seminary really because I thought that's what God wanted me to do. In fact, that was the second thing I never wanted to do, was go to seminary. And but out of God's leading, that's where I ended up. I knew that's where He wanted me. And coming out of seminary, I just didn't have any other job opportunities. So I called back home to Oklahoma and said I need a church, because I was getting married and I needed a job. And about 6 months after I was in that job, walking home one day, I just had a conversation with myself. I thought to myself, I guess this is really where I belong. It just feels right. So like a lot of others who've been called into ministry, we usually go kicking and screaming a lot of times, and other times a call into, I think whatever you do is really a persistent, kind of growing sense of what you ought to do. Some folks are fortunate to know real early what they really want to do. I don't know that most of us are like that. I sure wasn't.
Well, you've been at Chapel Hill now in Oklahoma City for 12 years, and I understand that service is coming to an end.
It is.
And you're going to take on a new position.
I am.
Tell our viewers what you're going to do and what does that involve?
Well, I'm going to be appointed, that's the term, as a district superintendent of the United Methodist Church in Oklahoma. I'm going to be located in the Ardmore area, but I'm a part of a group of folks that are considered conference superintendents. In the United Methodist Church, we have an organization that deploys clergy, as opposed to other churches that maybe call their ministers. They go out and get a list of those that are available and listen to them. We deploy them, and so we're really a part of what we call a connection. And I'll be helping to mentor and oversee about 40 congregations and pastors. I'll also be a part of the work of the whole Oklahoma area, we call that, churches all across the state. We've got about 650 churches here in the state, and working under our bishop, Robert Hayes, I'll be working with another 11 district superintendents. So this is a whole new ballgame for me.
Yeah.
Well, with the Da Vinci Code coming out and that kind of spurring some international religious skepticism, tell me about...
And protest.
Yeah, and protest. Tell me about the place of the church internationally around the world.
It'd be interesting to talk about the Da Vinci Code since I've seen it and read it, but yeah, ask about really the church around the globe. We're at a time of an incredible amount of skepticism, I think, here in the States with regards to the Christian faith. But the reality is, I would also say there's a lot of thought that maybe Christianity is on the wane, it's declining globally with the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and other religions. But the truth is, Christianity is growing at such a massive pace in the southern parts of the world that we're seeing really a major transition of the Christian church. One of the scholars who's really documented this recently has been a guy by the name of Philip Jenkins, and he has been looking really at what's taken place over the last about 50 years. In the last 50 years, the Christian church in traditionally the European and North American areas have to some degree flattened. In Europe, they're declining. In America, it's holding steady. But south in Latin America, in Africa and Asia, particularly sub-Sahara Africa, the church is absolutely exploding. To the point that in this particular 5-year period, for the first time since the 5th century, the largest populations of the Christian church now are south of the equator rather than north of the equator. This has been a dramatic shift. Was really unexpected, to tell you the truth. Skepticism was that the Euro-American religions in Africa and Latin America and Asia were really Western religions. In the 1960s, before you were around, Reid, there was a decolonialization in Africa and Latin America where the major colonial powers gave up their leadership in most of these countries, and the assumption was that those countries will revert back to maybe traditional tribal religions. What happened in the leadership vacuum was the Christian faith, which is perhaps the most indigenous religion in the world. We think of it as really European or North American, but it really fits and adapts to any culture. It just exploded. And where there were virtually no Protestants south of the Rio Grande, now there are just millions of Protestant Christians. The Catholic Church is burgeoning and booming, and one of the interesting things is that where the Christian church has been strong over the last, say, 1,500 years, have been in Europe and North America, those populations are decreasing, so they're not having as many kids. Even if there's not any new evangelism in those nations, just because of the birth rate alone, those churches are just growing by leaps and bounds.
Guy, let me get in here and get us to a break. We're visiting with Dr. Guy Ames, a Methodist minister, with my co-host Reid Calhoun. We'll be right back.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a blood nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up. Want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Welcome back to The Verdict. I'm Kent Meyers with my co-host Reid Calhoun, and today we're visiting with Dr. Guy Ames about religion in America, religion in the world, and the changing face of the church. And Guy, let me ask you this. You've been in this profession.
Business.
I almost said that. For 28 years. And have you seen the face of the church change in that period of time?
Dramatically.
In what respect?
Dramatically. Well, I think one of the things that's happened in particularly the American church is that we have followed what I would call the Walmartization of society. Once upon a time, people were a part of churches because of their denominational affinity. Now they're consumers. And as a result of that, people are very discriminated about all of the amenities that relate to church. They're very interested in worship style, music style, how the nursery looks, are the bathrooms clean. We're dominated by media, so your public presentation has got to be really, really good because people are accustomed to seeing things on television that are really good. And that's
Like this show.
Exactly, like this show, like this show.
Well, it got a lot better when Reid came on, I'll tell you that. Go
It
ahead.
sure looks better, I got to tell you. But one of the things that's happened has been the interest in churches that can provide larger services. So now we have mega churches because they are able financially to provide much more amenities, programs, projects, staffing, facilities than churches 30 years ago. And so people are much more accustomed to large churches. I would say among Protestants, well, even in Catholics, the thing that is changing, has really changed us, have been the changing style of worship. Music is a big change, and the size of churches. Those things have been really driving a lot of what we do in church.
Do you think that these changes are good or bad, and also how have these changes affected our younger population?
Reid, I think the change is always difficult because we're changing cultures. We're living through a period of time that's not too dissimilar from, say, Martin Luther's time with the Reformation. Martin Luther, for instance, coming out of the Catholic Church, was a prolific songwriter, and he had a famous quote, "Why should the devil have all the good music?" And so he wanted to get away from the old Baroque music into something that he thought was more contemporary. And at that time, the organ, believe it or not, was considered to be the work of the devil. You only use that in bars. And Martin Luther brought the organ into the church. Well, now we're kind of in the same situation where guitars or rock bands are a part of worship. And I think it's difficult. It's difficult for changing cultures and generations to make an adaptation. And sometimes it will polarize a local congregation. A lot of the new churches that are growing are drawing people out of the older churches. So you've got other churches that are declining, new churches that are larger. Back when I was a kid, we had about 60% of Protestants were mainline, and 40% were what we'd call independent or non-denominational. That population is reversed. It's now 60% independent, non-denominational, and 40% mainline. About young people, I think there's a growing spiritual interest among young people, but they don't all like church the way maybe their parents or grandparents liked it. And so you've got a lot of young people and young adults that are moving spiritual new directions. It's been interesting for me. When I started ministry, I wouldn't see young adults showing up for church until after the birth of their first child. When they went off to college, they were done. Birth of their first child, they would show up. Today, I'm watching couples get married at 22 and 23 and 24, and the Sunday after their honeymoon, they're back in church. It's a different day. I think it's a very hopeful day.
Well, do you see as a just finished your tenure as a pastor of a 3,200 member congregation? Is that a real different job for you than when you were in your smaller churches?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Now there've got to be some similarities. You preach on Sunday morning, but what are the differences?
Well, number one, the big difference is that you're expected to be a small corporation manager or CEO. When I was in my first church, I didn't have a single paid person on staff except for a little part-time janitor. And as long as he got there on Saturday night before Sunday, we were fine. And so I've had to develop some human resource skills. That's been a challenge. Administration is a big challenge because we're not trained in seminary how to administer a business. We're trained to preach and do pastoral care and care for folks, counsel. But that's the big challenge. Also, the competition among churches has required me to stay on my toes. What folks are doing over in another congregation impacts what happens in our church. And so I've had to become a real student of culture and business even.
Well, what's the most favorite thing that you do in the course of a month as a pastor?
That's a good question. What generally is probably the thing that I enjoy the most is spending time caring for and helping people in the congregation. Someone's going to come in with a particular need. I think the thing that really drives my passions most of all are those occasions when someone shows up and says, I need some real spiritual help. I am really seeking God. Can you help me? And when those times come and I get a chance to spend time praying with someone, helping them further on their spiritual path, my goal is to help people to become disciples and followers of Jesus. When I get to do that, that's worth everything. I love that.
Now, okay, to quote Mr. Meyers here, if you can look into the crystal ball and make a guess at what do you think will happen to the church in the next decade? What do you think? The face of the church.
I think that the face of the church will continue to change. I think there is going to be a movement towards smaller churches.
Movement away from the mega churches?
I think so. I think there's going to be a desire for more intimacy. I don't think it will look like the small churches of the past. In fact, one television broadcast recently talked about the house churches where people are gathering in groups of 25 to 30 or 40 or 50. I think intimacy and worship is going to be important. I think that there will be a greater degree of blending. I think the contemporary worship style has been really pushed to the edge so that now a lot of young folks are going to be looking for things that are even more ancient than their parents grew up with. Maybe even we're seeing some interesting growth of the Greek Orthodox Church, which is the Orthodox are the oldest of denominations. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that. I think more choices. We'll have more different styles. Instead of having lots of the same, we'll have more and more different in the American church.
More young people, fewer young people?
That's a good question. I think probably with Reid's generation, what we're calling the millennial kids, we're probably going to see more young people get serious about faith and religion. I think that's going to happen.
Guy, we've got to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it very much.
It's been fun.
You've been hearing from Dr. Guy Ames and also my co-host Reid Calhoun. You're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers with my co-host Reid Calhoun. Interesting visit with Dr. Guy Ames.
Yeah, definitely. I think he really nailed the opinion of the young people. And I was also very interested to find out about that religion is exploding below the equator. I had no clue about that.
No, that was news to me, and we'll get Guy back on here in 6 months or so and see what new has developed. We are going to have a show next week. We're going to be pleased to have Reid Calhoun back on it. But Reid, what is it going to be?
Well, the Chesapeake Senior Vice President, Tom Price, is going to tell us what matters in life. So pretty interested to find that out.
Well, we'll find out in a week what matters. For Reid Calhoun, thank you so much for joining us. Let me ask you to come on the Verdict website, theverdict.tv. Tell us what you would like to see and what kind of show you'd like to have, and we'll try to accommodate you. On behalf of Reid Calhoun, I'm Kent Meyers. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.
preceding program was produced by the Production Services Group at Cox Communications, exclusively for the Cox Channel.